And today I have a very special guest with me. I have Dr. Jonice Webb. She is a clinical psychologist and the author of Running on Empty, Overcome Your Childhood Emotional Neglect. Dr. Webb has also been on NPR. She is the editor of the mental health you're the mental health editor of Bella Online, but most importantly for me, Jonice, is that you are a mom of two. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today, for being here on another episode of Teachable Moments. I'm very excited to have you.
Thanks, Lori. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So, Jonice, you wrote a book called Running on Empty, which kind of describes a lot of my early years. And what I really connected with in this book is that you write about a topic that nobody else is talking about. And the foundation of my work, Teach Through Love. Teach actually originally was an acronym for Transforming the Emotional Abuse of Children. And I was calling it emotional abuse. But it didn't really fit into that because I didn't have, deadbeat parents who weren't working or on drugs or any of those things. I had the really nice suburban home, and behind closed doors, though, there was a lot that was missing. So you said that this is the first book on emotional neglect. Is that true? Really, no one else has covered and I believe it because I couldn't find a name for what I had gone through. So tell me about how this became your passion, your specialty, and how you even named this.
It really is the first book, although there have been other books that talk about pieces of it. None really gives it a name and really addresses it as a thing. So basically, the way I came to it is that I've been practicing for about 20 years, psychology as a psychologist, and I started to realize that there were a lot of people who were telling me that they felt empty inside, that they felt kind of lost in life. These are adults who were saying that they just felt that something wasn't right with them. They felt sort of deeply flawed, but that they had really good childhood, so there was no explanation for it. And a lot of them blamed themselves for not being happier. I started to try to figure out what the heck could all these people have in common. And over time, by trying to sort this puzzle out, I realized that it wasn't anything that had happened to them as children. It was something that had failed to happen for them as children. That their parents had treated them as if their emotions didn't matter. Their parents had not validated their feelings, hadn't responded to them on a feeling level or an emotional level. And many of these parents even loved their kids, but they didn't notice who their child really was or what their child was really feeling. And that was the missing piece for these people.
And that's so interesting because one of the most important things that I focus on is that emotion piece. And you say in your book that emotion is an undeniable part of your child's biology. What do you mean by that? Why is this so important from your perspective as, working for so many years in this field?
Because our emotions are literally built into our brains. They're more basic to who we are than the cerebral cortex, where our thoughts come from, developed many, many millennia after, thousands of years after the cerebral cortex, the base of the brain was developed. And that's where our emotions come from, the brainstem. So they are a more basic part of who we are than our thoughts. Yet we're a very thought-oriented society. In today's world, we really value thought. What do you think? We talk about what we think. We don't talk about what we feel, and we tend to kind of view it as, it doesn't matter. Feelings are wimpy, or they're soft, or they're, all the different words people apply.
Yeah, for parents, it seems that emotion gets in the way of their parenting. And when they see the emotion, they set a limit, and then they see an emotion come back at them. They're like, whoa, we can't have that. And they try to stuff that down. So I don't think that most people think that they're emotionally neglecting their children. I know I have a lot of clients that say, I'm using empathy, I'm doing this, why, what's not working? So what is it that do you think is really happening for people here? What is making that, what's missing for kids? What's going on there?
It's an excessive focus on behavior, because all parents want their kid to behave right, which is very understandable. But what we lose sight of is the fact that behavior is driven by emotion. So if you just address the behavior, and you don't get to the cause of it and what's driving it, then you're only dealing with a very superficial part of your child.
What happens if you only, because I'm right on this page with you, but I want people to hear this from as many sources as they can. What happens when we only focus, what happens to our emotional self when we only focus on that behavior for our kids? What happens to their emotional self?
Well, it's this sort of implicit message that we give our children without realizing it. And I've caught myself doing it with my own kids, and I've seen the effects of it myself, that when you don't respond to what your child is feeling, and that doesn't mean indulge your child's feeling, it means notice and respond to it. And sometimes that's with limits, but just noticing your child's feeling and responding to it. If you don't do that, you're giving an implicit message that your feelings are either invisible, irrelevant, or don't matter. And that's what the child hears. If you do that enough over time, once or twice, we all fail at times.
Right.
But if you're not responding to their emotions enough, the message you give them is your emotions don't matter.
Wow.
So the child pushes them down.
And so is this how the adult grows up to think that they were loved and had a happy childhood, but that's what's missing, is that validation? This is such a tough subject, I think, for parents, because for me, it's not about blame. It's not about, you're doing everything wrong or you're ruining your child, because I think that's what people hear. When they hear emotional neglect, they think, well, I'm not doing that. I'm not neglecting.
Sounds kind of awful.
I know. And even for me, using that term emotional abuse, it was so strong and people didn't want to resonate with that. I remember, meeting way back when I first started, telling people what it was about, and I would explain that whole name, and they were like, well, I'm not emotionally abusing my children. And it was like, oh, okay, I need to. So how can you just give me a couple of examples of how a parent might do this? What an emotionally neglectful parent might sound like. So people know that it's not, you're not this horrible monster, it's just that we're unaware.
Yeah. Well, here's a great example. Let's say there's a 10-year-old boy named Josh, and he's coming home from school one day, and he's feeling really upset because he had an argument with some friends on the playground that day. So he's feeling this swirl of emotion. He feels angry that he feels like his friends attacked him on the playground verbally, not physically. And he was ganged up on, and he started crying, and then his friends started making fun of him for crying. So he feels mortified, and he feels hurt, and he feels angry, and he's really dreading having to go back to school the next day to face these friends. He walks home with all of this going on in his head. He arrives home. His parents they love him, but they're having a very busy afternoon, driving kids around, doing all this stuff, and no one notices that Josh is upset. So he goes through the motions of the afternoon without saying a word and without anyone saying, hey, Josh, what's going on? Has something happened at school today? So, that happens to every kid, and it's okay. It's not going to scar the kid for life. But if that's what the kid's entire childhood is like most of the time, then the message is, Josh, your feelings don't matter to me. I don't see them. I don't register them. They're not important. Just behave well, do what you're supposed to do, and all will be well.
Wow. And not really giving the child any skills or tools to do just that. It's sort of like you're left on your own to figure it out. How does that manifest in behavior? What are those behaviors really telling us then? Because I think, again, people see that negative behavior and they want to address that. What do we address instead, using that same example?
Well, if Josh say that he feels really alone. I mean, a lot of emotionally neglected kids, instead of acting out, they just become extremely self-sufficient. So they look like they're doing fine, and they grow up to be very self-sufficient as well.
So it's hidden.
It's hidden.
You don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
But they're struggling.
Inside.
Yeah.
They look perfect. They look fine. Everybody thinks they're fantastic, but they're not inside.
So these are the kids that are giving that kind of traditional parenting sense the good name, because they're getting by. They're doing what they're told. They're sort of becoming invisible, essentially, and we're never noticing. So what do parents do then? What do we do to bridge this this gap? How do we deliver this message to parents that this is so important to understand?
Well, I think the message is pay attention to who your child really is. Who is your child? What is your child's true nature? What do they tend to feel, and in response to what? Just be attuned to that. Watch not for what your child does, but for what your child feels. And try to, point out their feelings and help them learn how to put words to it. For example, if Josh's mom, when he got home, said, "Hey, what's wrong? You look upset." He might say, "I don't want to talk about it," and go to his room. But he knows she's there if he wants to talk about it.
Right.
And he knows that she noticed. Or he might say, "Well, this happened at school today." And then his mom talks him through it and helps him figure out how to handle it, what to do, put words to the emotions. And then that Josh will grow up with a lot of emotional intelligence and a lot of understanding of how his emotions work, how to use his emotions to make decisions and deal with situations.
Which is what emotional intelligence is. It's that ability to understand and manage and use, which we want all kids to have, and yet we're so focused on their behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's key right there. I think if we can just remember to stop looking and judging at what we see and start pulling up the hood and looking underneath and seeing what's really going on behind that stuff. So
Right.
why is it so difficult, do you think, to change? Because I know a lot of people walk away agreeing, and they'll say, "I get this. I know, I can see how this can manifest in my life." But it's hard to translate. So what can we do to shift this?
I think it's hard parents can understand it intellectually, but I think that a lot of people grew up this way themselves with their own parents focused on their behavior, not their feelings. So when you grow up without it yourself, these are the parents who are really loving and caring and trying their hardest, but you can't give something that you never got yourself unless you realize, "Oh, wait a minute, I never got this. I have to give it to myself first, and then I'll be able to give it to my children."
Right there. So giving that emotional care and attention, nurturing even
To yourself.
to yourself. I love that, because that was one of my other favorite things you wrote in your book, was that you wrote this book, Running on Empty, Overcome Your Childhood Emotional Neglect, to help people become aware of what didn't happen in your childhood and what you don't remember, because what didn't happen has as much or more power over who you have become as an adult than any of those events that you do remember. So we've got a lot of hidden stuff operating underneath.
Right.
So how do we get in touch with that stuff? That if we're not even aware of it, what can we do?
Right. Well, that's the dilemma. And that's why I came up with this questionnaire that you can take as an adult to help you figure out if you were emotionally neglected yourself, because you can't look back and remember that your mother didn't ask you what was wrong, right? You remember the things she did do. So there's a questionnaire that you can take. It's on my website, actually.
I was going to say, is it on? And tell everybody what your website is.
It's emotionalneglect.com. So you can take take the questionnaire and find out whether you were emotionally neglected or not. And then try to figure out in what ways you were neglected and what was missing for you. And also, it's, part of the missing piece for a lot of people is the emotional intelligence part, which has to do with how emotions work, how to recognize them, how to name them, how to manage them, what to do with them, what they're telling you. There's so much to understand. We just feel like, well, emotions are such a basic part of us. We just automatically understand them, and it's so not true.
It's not. We usually don't know what they are. They make us uncomfortable, so we stuff them away, right?
Exactly.
Into our own hidden resources. So this is a process. And this is exactly the process that I take my own clients through when they are parenting, because they have to go back and know their story. Not to relive it and rehash it, but just to know how it's influencing their behavior now. How it's coming out, how they're pushing. I remember a time with my own daughter when I was I just had a conversation with my mother, and then turned into that child again and could not give my daughter in the next 30 minutes what she needed, because I was still reeling from not getting from a phone call that I had just had. I shut down and become like an 8-year-old child again. So does this does this happen to people? Do you notice that they sort of unconsciously can shift into that child that you were and not having those things and sort of acting from that place? Is that common?
Oh, yes,
Okay.
definitely. There's nothing like a
Confirmation
parent.
is always good.
Yeah, there's nothing like a parent to reduce us to what we were when we were children. It's like that parent-child relationship can just kind of stay frozen in time in our brains. Definitely, it's very normal.
Awesome. Like I said, validation is always good, even though I know it logically, but just hearing it again, it's sort of because I myself, it's like peeling layers. Every time I think okay, I got through something, I'm more emotionally aware in certain areas, and then other things pop up for me to heal, to look at, and I think my daughter pushes a lot of those buttons just so I can heal that stuff. I see it reflected in our relationship. So I think if parents can do that, if they can look not just again at that behavior, but even what is this child telling me about my own fears and insecurities and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. What's the biggest takeaway that you can give us, that parents can walk away with something concrete or tangible to help them shift and become more emotionally aware with their kids?
Well, I think part of it is something you were just talking about, which is if you really care about doing the best for your kid, that's the biggest thing to start out with. Caring and wanting to do your best, huge. Second, instead of just focusing on giving your child everything, focusing on what you didn't get. Like, being a good parent requires that you focus on yourself, and it can't be all focus on the kid. So look at yourself, ask yourself, what did I not get as a child? And start working on that, and that's the best thing you can do for your own kid.
Wonderful.
In your own parenting.
So it sounds like taking care of ourselves is
emotionally, yes.
Yeah, is number one.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Will you come back? Can we do part 2?
Absolutely. I would love to.
I would love to do that. Thank you so much. Tell everybody again, Jonice, where they can find you on the web.
emotionalneglect.com, and also I have an emotional neglect column on psychcentral.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here and share this very, very, very important information with my audience. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lori.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. And if you want to find out more about Jonice, you can go to emotionalneglect.com. And for more tips and tools like this, be sure to get on over to teachthroughlove.com, sign up for my email updates, or sign up right here on YouTube. And remember, until next time, it's about consciousness, not perfection.